in Halifax, went to study at NASCAD, Acadia, and Dalhousie. You're from the East Coast in that respect, Paulette. I wonder what the conditions were that led you to become an artist.
The conditions, that's, I would have been thinking about, I would have been coming of age in the mid to late 70s, which was a very fertile time for the arts. And a lot of my friends were going to NASCAD. I was thinking, oh, there's lots of early memories when I don't think there was ever a conscious decision where I decided to be an artist. I think I was always creative and observant and thoughtful. I mean, honestly, those things kind of were always present. And I was in a community of people that were creative. But also, my uncle and my grandfather were artists, and that isn't, even though that's surprisingly, I come from a background where art was a part of our family. My granddad was a commercial artist in Toronto, and my Uncle Don, was a printmaker. He worked in advertising when I was growing up, and then he became a lithographer, and he started Sword Street Studio, and he started Open Studio as well. He was involved in the beginning of Open Studio. So he was a well-known lithographer. So that that's a part of growing up. There was always art around, but I remember at a really young age, starting things like, starting a coffee house and putting on performances, and it wasn't a straight path towards, I've always been working across disciplines, so performance, dance, writing, poetry, avid reader, voracious reader, and so all of these things were always a part of my growing up. I remember making my parents buy the Time Life, painting books that would come into the house, and it's always, yeah. And actually, I suppose too, my first boyfriend, Dave McLaren, his father was the curator of the Nova Scotia Museum, and so that there was all this texture and all these materials around history and artifacts, and so it's always been a part of who growing up and who I am, and I just slid into it, not like it was conscious, but determined to kind of figure out a way of being creative in a myriad of different ways. So at first it would have been improvisational theater. I studied Latin at university. I studied weaving, costume design, textiles. So it was just really diverse. The background is very diverse in terms of studying, and a bit of a self-starter. So at a certain point, the Maritimes felt very conservative, and I got myself to Toronto, and I think the aspiration at that point would have been to work in independent theatre, but I fell into Trinity Square Video. I fell into the crowd at Trinity Square Video, and then, kind of moved between the Funnel and Trinity Square, and it was a really rich time at that point, early 80s. After the kind of, the real impact of the 70s kind of conceptual video art, it was a kind of, right after that, it would have been getting into narrative and trying to get art on television, and then we formed collectives, and on it went. It just kind of slid into a community of people that were very active at starting spaces and working collaboratively, and I was working in performance and working in video and film, and I think I found the theater world very conservative, and also the idea, if you're working I was working as a performer, and the idea of doing scripts or plays suddenly became far less interesting than generating my own material and working with the ideas that I was interested in. which would have come out of kind of structural cinema and being very, and narrative. I think about the things that were really influential back in the early 80s, deconstructing narrative form, and that's kind of where it all started.
Given that rich texture, Paulette, through all of the experiences that you were building yourself through there, I'm kind of curious about what thoughts you had, and now what thoughts you have today about the role of the artist, or what an artist can do. Where did this texture sort of direct you?
What an artist can do. I've always, the ethos has shifted, I think, perhaps in the last 30 years. Because certainly I entered into a period, certainly when I was entering into the art world, the idea of the market wasn't as dominant. And the idea of engaging, it was a rich time for thought, for ideas, for playing with form, for inserting oneself into the broader media context, and I don't know, for me, art has always been about making people think. Has always been it's always been about a critical engagement with the viewer, making a viewer conscious of what it is they're viewing, and to creating an opportunity to think about meaning, generation of meaning, aliveness, I don't know. So it has always been about touching people and making people think about consciousness, about, uncertainty, about things around stability or instability. So, I always thought art played a role in terms of being conscious, in terms of, reinforcing people's consciousness, in terms of reinforcing the notion of liveness, the notion of being a thinking human being, a thinking, caring human being. So that's kind of where I've always placed it.
You talk about the funnel, and as Doc mentioned, to you as a matter of fact, I think, the funnel of an early structuralist film collective was perhaps characterized as a modernist utopia, which is to say, if we think of modernism, very much involved in the perhaps the itch of consciousness to see things through the everyday to some kind of fundamental, essential experience. Do you think that the funnel played a role in your development in this respect?
Yes, because certainly I was a participant, an audience member, a viewer, and a part of the dialogue. But funnily enough, it was also a clubhouse that was very restrictive, and it was a bit of a private club. So it was difficult. I remember going to join the funnel, and they saying, "Well, you can only join. We don't accept members. You have to already be a member." I thought, okay. So Trinity had a much more open door policy, but I think that the language that we deployed in video art was much more filmic than it was video based. I think that I came at it as, well, I came at it as a kind of, formally engaging with the materiality of film and video as mediums in and of themselves, with two different kind of languages, but somehow dealing with how those two languages came together as moving images and as experience. So yes, because my education happened in these institutions, you know, for sure. I was a part of those communities, either peripherally or more foundationally, but yes, is because I was always, that's where I learned, you know, and the things that we see are the things that they also inform who we are. And that's what I mean about that critical dialogue you engage in as a viewer, as a conscious, you know, intelligent viewer. You're taking this material in, and it becomes a part of the dialogue that you're having with your own work and with the community at large.
I want to read back something that you've said about your own work.
Okay.
And I'd like you to expand on it or comment on the quotation, which is, I'm interested in paradox, unease, humor, and contradiction. I like to directly address and implicate the viewer in the process of spectatorship. And you also go on to say, guided by research into histories where the romantic oscillates with the scientific. Beautifully phrased. I wonder if you'd care to comment on that in terms of how you see the core of the practice.
The core of the practice comes out of, first you're moved by something, you know, first, I mean, curiosity, the idea of history, the idea of research, the idea of ethos of particular times. Okay, the scientific, I mean, you know, I guess I see it, we're complex beings. So we have a range of emotional and analytical capacities by which we experience the world. So there's a play between those two realms. And I'm not, when I take in an experience, it's often from a detached viewpoint that I observe something and I become very curious about it. So there's an analytical process that goes on there. And often it's about behavior. It's about it's people, what people do, and circumstances that conspire around someone's life that I become very curious about. So that's one aspect, because I can see, I'm very curious, you know, in analyzing people's reactions to things, that sometimes people are behaving in a very emotional way, and that can be a very, that can present certain problems or issues, and I don't know. And it's interesting because you're phrasing a question, and now I'm trying to think. You know, when would I have been talking about? You know, like certainly I'm interested in the kind of pendulum swing that is that are historical conditions. Mm-hmm. You know, I was very interested in the Enlightenment, you know, but prior to that, very interested in our kind of very connected perspective that we may have been very, I think the ethos of a time prior to Enlightenment where we would have not seen our subject-object difference as so delineated as it became during the Enlightenment, when suddenly things are categorized and contained within language, and that curiosity to know things and to seek answers and to seek concrete, clear, rational answers for why everything is. Oh, well, dopamine is, you know, making us think a certain way, or, you know, like those rational scientific conditions or answers that solve a certain way of why something is. But then there's the other side of it, which is the complexity of why things are the way they are, and certainly ego and emotion and irrationality really play out in that. And then there's romance. Well, romance. What could romance be? Romance is like yearning, and striving, and idealism, and so those are kind of two pillars of, you know, who we are and how society functions and what are the conditions that society functions in. So that kind of broad thinking, or that, you know, like I'm very curious about or you know, immerse myself in thoughts around this. So I have done a lot of historical research into particular very specific ideas or very specific people or movements or things, and so you could and very aware, oh, well, that was a very scientifically defined era, or that was a much more emotional, you know, there was a romantic in the art historical sense. And yeah, you know, some people are very analytical and very rational and very, you know, mathematical in the way they might approach things. But yeah, for me, I'm interested in the whole range, the whole swing of it all. So, you know, into there, I'm interested in stability and instability. I'm interested in, yeah. I perhaps I have initially like a kind of, I'm moved by something. Well, I mean moved, and that would hook me into pursuing an idea. But I'll always try to ground myself in a more in a research base, right, where I could understand a myriad of conditions that led to something being the way it is, and try to find a non-sentimental or non-romantic way of treating something. And probably then humor comes into it. You know, it would often be something, I might often be kind of taken up with a tragedy, or taken up, that when I say moved, I think I'm often moved by by something that feels quite tragic, or feels quite, you know, I don't know. It's hard to be, you know, generalized about it, but and then one tries to find you try to find the root, the causes, and you think about it from just a whole. You try to think about it in as complete a way as you can, and somehow maybe that's where humor ends up coming into it, because you can, I don't know. I mean, humor is spontaneous, and I you know, when you're making something, you can do something that's surprising and it can just strike you as very, very funny, and then you're often going, yes, that has to stay in there. But does that helps illuminate that?
I'm curious about the fact that you did study to be a polygraphic examiner, and that's of course about the question of truth and falsehood, or
fact and fiction.
Fact and fiction. That's good too. Would you like to talk a little bit about your movement in that direction and how it relates to your work?
Sure. It's funny because the body of work that came out of that was called The Directed Lie. And, you know, I was terribly excited by the whole prospect of this, and, you know, it evolved in a way that was really, it was a very in the moment project that went on for 5 years. I've just kind of put it to sleep now. But first, oddly, I was interested in electricity, and I'm interested in the electrical current in the body, and I'm interested in the fact that, you know, that we're electrified. That I was even interested in the idea of attraction, and that being an electric thing, and that being an energy thing. And so the idea of energy is something that, the invisibility, but the tangibility of what energy is an electrical signal. So I had a commission in England to work in a garden outside of Manchester, in Tatton Park, and I was working with those plants, and it's a historical garden, so there's a range, there's all these different periods of gardening that are represented in this garden because it had been an estate that had several epochs of gardening techniques that were evident in this vast estate. And I was asked to choose a site and to work with that site. So I chose the Victorian. I chose a Victorian garden, and I was interested in ferns, and I was interested in the walking fern. I was interested in this idea that a fern, the plants are. You don't think of plants as moving. You think of them as being stable or planted. And I was really interested in things that are, that behave in contradictory ways. So I thought, the walking fern, isn't that interesting? They throw a frond and they root, and then they throw a frond and they root, and so I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And so I was very interested in the idea of agency, the idea of this being a site where the plants, it's also colonialist, right? So you've got this idea of plants being ripped out of their native lands and brought into another site and cultivated in this way. And the ferns, and you do this research and you find, the Victorians were fern crazy. So they almost destroyed the forest because they took all the ferns out of the forest and blah, blah, blah. So I could go on about that. But the fact of the matter is that a friend was staying with me, Jan Ververt, actually. He was in Toronto doing research, and he was staying here, and he knew I was working on this project, so he, as a parting gift, gave me this book called The Secret Life of Plants. And The Secret Life of Plants starts with an experiment with a polygraph machine. Baxter, Mr. Baxter, leading polygraph scientist. He was responsible he published that plants had sentience, and he demonstrated their sentience by doing experiments with plants while they were attached to the polygraph instrument. So he was demonstrating that plants reacted to the people that were around them. They could be fearful of them, or so they had sentience. So I thought this was fantastic. And, I love film. I love film history. I love film noir. I love the female character in the film noir. And the polygraph. I mean, what's there not to... Talk about a romantic instrument, an instrument that's at the intersection of science and science fiction. And that it's such a colorful instrument, that it's so, contested, right? That it's got such contested power. So, you go on eBay, Google, right moment for all the private detectives who used polygraphs in the 60s and 70s to be selling their equipment off. So I bid and won a polygraph instrument on eBay, and they're not very straightforward instruments. It arrived, and it was very complex, and I looked at it and I go, okay, I haven't got a clue how to use this, and so I found people who could, I went to the RCMP, I went to this, everything, there's such adventures in this life of being an artist, I will say that, because I remember going to Ottawa and meeting this RCMP officer who was retired. I swear to God, he showed up in little shorty shorts. And we're in the suburbs of Ottawa, and I knock on the door, hello, and he come in, he takes me up to his bedroom upstairs, and it was a very peculiar experience. Anyway, he was a very nice man, but he told me that I should go to a school in Baltimore, and that really I should be trained in order to use the instrument. He couldn't show it to me in an afternoon, and there was quite a bit to it, so I trained, and that was quite an experience, to go and to be undercover, with the police, and to be, an artist. And I knew that they would be suspicious of me, but in the end, we had a really rich and meaningful experience for 2.5 months. learning this technique together, and so still not knowing what the project was. So if you ask how does a project begin, it begins with a curiosity about how the thing functions, what it is. It's the electrical magnetic current that I'm interested in, the fact that it taps into the body. So now I can talk about it from a scientific perspective. That's the parasympathetic nervous system, and that our body responds in a certain way, and that the polygraph reads these minute differences in electrical charges that occur in the body when we lie. And so there is a foundation to how this machine works. So then, from there you're thinking, well, how can I make this a project? And I'm also thinking, well, there was a lot of research that went into criminology and the history of cameras and lenses and psychology. And so I thought it's got to involve a camera. Cameras and polygraph are the same, very similar technologies, and also electricity, phrenology, all of these things. This is all the sciencey stuff that I'm interested in. Is the reading, I don't know, electrical chemical shifts. So I developed over the next period of time, I developed a series of questions based on my training as a polygraph specialist, that were found, that were probing questions that related to anybody. These were questions of just a condition of being. Did you do this? Did you do that? Things that everybody, the small lies that we tell every day. Because the fact is, the notion of our social success depends on our ability to fabricate ourselves, to make ourselves. And I was very interested in the artist subject because the artist subject is it's a constructed self. So what is the truth? Where is the truth in that notion of the self? And we trade in deception in a way, and I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean, we trade in representation, and representation itself is one step, is a simulacra, or is a mimicry of representation, just that thing about what happened and how we perceive it happening. And then putting that forward for the viewer, I don't know if this, because people don't know the work, that maybe this is coming out in a confused way, but the viewer is given an opportunity to see the instrument responding. The subject is sitting on one side, and they're responding to a series of questions that are probing and ethical and morally exposing on some level. So you see them answering the questions, and you see the machine responding, and then you're also analyzing the person's response and the machine's response and seeing contradictory or non-contradictory signals that are proving to be, I don't know, I just think it forms a really complex notion of the subject. But I was also very interested and conscious of the fact that also, like you're doing here, you're recording a moment, you're recording history, and it's a very important thing to document the times that we live in and the people that we engage with. And so, much like you're doing, I interviewed 330 artists, most of whom are Canadian or related, that I have access to, but it took place all over the world. I did it in Berlin and Paris and London and Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto, Florida. So it was a very deep project, and I was very excited, and it was very consuming. But at a certain point, it's funny because the project was, anyway, I was very excited to work on it. But it took over my life for the last 5 years, so I just kind of said, okay, I think it needs closure, and now perhaps I'd like to find a home for that archive. Yeah.
So we're talking about Paulette, specifically with this project, but of course with all of them, because you do work in video and to some extent with a reference to film. So we are talking tools of the trade, which are vastly more complex, let's say, than a paintbrush. So the tool is a very important factor in the practice. I'm kind of interested what thoughts you have about the relationship between the tool and the idea. To what extent the tool influences the idea, to what extent the idea selects the tool. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. I'm not someone who is stuck to one medium. And I guess, but I have, there's also different languages, right? When I think about, I mean, that's what we do when we make art. We find a way to shape an idea into an experience, or we create an experience that the viewer engages with through an idea. The tools. I don't come at it thinking about technology per se, but I do think that I'm mirroring something back. I don't know how to answer that. I mean, because let's say you talk about, there was an obvious relationship between the camera and the polygraph, and then the finding of the diptych, and then the form, you would have to sit at a desk and select the file. The viewer was very actively stitched into the experience of being an interrogator. So I don't come at it like I don't think of tools as tools. I think of crafting experience through opportunities that I shape out of. It could be sculpture, and it could be. It doesn't come across. I don't think of tools like that, but I'll give an example. I worked with the house E1027, which was an Eileen Gray house in the south of France, and I spent a good 10 years thinking about visiting this house, researching the house, researching her, researching the period. And in the end, the work that came out of that house, that experience of thinking and making a body of work that related to, again, I think the core idea is energy, electricity, but there's emotion and structure, and there's a lot to it. But when you think about it, these lights come out of it, which is skin stretched. There was a house, her house, remolded out of floppy dragon skin silicone. So the house, was materially infused, with the kind of like sad floppiness. And there was a kinetic mirror that flirted with you and played with you and wouldn't let you look at yourself. There were flat 2D images, and there was a film. So you just kind of work through you look for opportunities, and you look to funnel ideas into materials or sculptural opportunities. So there's that, but then now I'm very much engaged in a new project. And I'm thinking about, there's a lot of opportunities about technology right now that are on the table. People are they're doing mapping, motion mapping, and they're working in virtual realities, and there's, Oculus and all of these experiences. And I'm finding myself going, I don't really want to work in that mode because I very much want to. Now I'm starting to feel, well, maybe I'm becoming old-fashioned, but I really like film. And I really actually like the idea of a work, a film, being something that you engage with, that somebody authored. And so I don't, so I'm just thinking about things in different ways, and I think that people hold out things for technology that I'm actually really suspicious about. So my sensitivity to tools and technologies is still very much about, I don't know. Well, I mean, it is who I am, the era that I grew up in. So those are, it's complex. So, but that's sort of how I approach. That's sort of how I approach it. I use a lot of I'll use industrial processes if I could manufacture something. Laser cut steel. But anyway, there's different ways that I approach things. I also, I have a partner, Michael Buchanan, who's an extraordinary. He's an extraordinary sculptor and he's an extraordinary maker. So I have wonderful conversations with him too about. The making of things. So there's often a refinement of ideas that goes on in dialogue with Michael and I. So those are different ways. He's very, we're both very charged by things and materials and stuff like that.
Just one thing. I want to come back to what you said much earlier about storytelling.
Uh-huh.
And it does strike me that you gravitated towards film and video, most specifically, because surely the storytelling that you grew up with must have had some kind of influence. Did you ever think about video and film as a means by which to tell stories?
It's interesting. I did think about that a lot earlier, and I did train script writing and I definitely like to craft a good story, but I also like to make people think. So you kind of want to move between the idea of keeping people critically engaged in what they're looking at, and playing with the idea of what story is, or playing with the idea of what's to be believed. How do we judge appearance? What are we seeing? Is what we're seeing really true? But I guess the idea that I'm working, things come. It's funny, we evolve, and that's absolutely a big part of it. And I guess I just am that, because I think if you had talked to me 10 years before, I would have thought of us as storytelling beings, and maybe I just don't. Yes, that's absolutely fundamental. Yes. Nova Scotia, sure, I'm sure growing up there, ghost stories, all that stuff. It was very, very much part of the culture, very much, informed by that culture.
Theory plays an important role in contemporary art. I'm kind of curious, Paulette, to what extent your reading of theory, or how theory, in fact, more generally speaking, perhaps plays a role in the construction of your work.
Mm-hmm. Well, it has always played a role. Theory has always played a role in my work. And, right from, I would think, one of the most influential texts I might have read was The Death of the Author, and the idea of the narrative being formed in the viewer. And so right from the get-go, I've always thought that narrative, the idea of where a story resides is really in the viewer. So I always played with that idea. So Roland Barthes or Foucault, and that. So I'm beginning to make art in the early '80s, and that was significant. And feminism, Freud, psychoanalysis, certainly those things have formed who I am as an artist and formed the idea base from which I work. And more recently, I suppose, new materialism is something that I'm really interested in. Object-oriented ontology, and then ideas around agency, and so yes, but I'm not driven by theory, but I've always felt, because my education, I didn't receive this I didn't march through 4 years of art school, and so I was very actively engaged in my own, in forming myself and forming film theory. Certainly, Laura Mulvey and all of these things are hugely influential. And like I said, like now, I continue to read based on the research that I'm doing for any particular project. I'm always seeking out philosophy. I'm always turning to philosophy to continue to question the notion of representation and being in metaphysics and doubt and all of these things that we reside within. So I enjoy it. I mean, reading I wish I had more time to read, and I'm looking forward to just coming into a period right now where that actually can be really active right now. But I'm I'm more interested in poetry at this point. I'm more interested in reading more lyrical, poetical texts, and so yes, theory, but not. I don't respond to theoretical propositions so much as theories to me has always been affirmation. It's always been about affirming ideas that you are, things that you're thinking about, because you're always going, oh yeah, that's right. So it's a kind of thing like that where you're mostly going, you're just enjoying it because it's the way that you're thinking, and it's helping in and so it's like that. That's how I use it.
So you mentioned literature, poetry and such. Is it the structure by which the poet or the writer constructs the story or the novel, the poem? Is it the storytelling itself, or what are the kinds of issues when it comes to literature that you find important for yourself?
Subjectivity, I think. The notion of how a subject is constructed, and actually the joy of language, the love of words, and then the love of a beautiful descriptive passage. Epiphrasis, is that, that kind of just beauty of language where you're swept away with metaphor or analogy like that. I go, I remember, this is such a banal one, but I can remember speaking, it was just for a second, with Anne-Marie MacDonald, who is a Canadian novelist, and we had been to a play together, and she said, oh, that play was like, a little bird that you would hold in your hands. And it's just those things of being able to transcribe experience into something, into analogous, images, where it just becomes so rich. It just enriches the experience. And so again, it's always this thing about experience and making it, just heightening it or being able to just nail it in another capacity that's just so joyful, yeah. So what was I reading? I just was teaching in Florence at the OCAD program recently, and so I had some time to get some reading done when, just in my downtime, I was reading Virginia Woolf, To the Lighthouse, and the idea of just the things that were happening internally with the subject. So I'm quite interested, in the ideas of what a writer is attempting to do and how they're doing it, and so no, it's not actually story, although a good story, I've been, and we're on Netflix and watching movies and going to films. I mean, there's nothing like being swept away by a great narrative film. A great detective story with a good female lead. That's with a quirky, definitive, anyway. So yes.
All of this, of course, operates all of what we're talking about, the business of being an artist, the construct of subjectivity. These all take place within the general cultural environment in which we're set. And some might call that the zeitgeist, some might call it the dominant discourse. There are a number of different terms for us. I'm kind of curious if you have a sense from your own practice of working within this cultural environment, within this zeitgeist or discourse, and how you see, or do you see the work contributing to that, if there is such a thing?
Well, you live long enough and you see periods come and go, and zeitgeist being there and not there, and certainly, participatory art. What's going on right now? Choreography. Everybody's talking choreography. These are interesting. These are ideas I'm interested in. Vectors and gestures. And I mean, we're all like I'm very tied into what's going on, I think, and to an extent globally, because I look at art all the time, and I read news presses and magazines, and so you're aware of, zeitgeist. I mean, I think, certainly from a pedagogical perspective, I think new materialism and object-oriented ontology is really a hot subject, so I suspect it's now, a waning subject, perhaps. But, participatory, I'm trying to think, performance events. I'm trying to think of relational aesthetics, that was all the rage, and certainly I was very skeptical of that movement on some level, because anyway, for all the reasons that maybe someone like Claire Bishop might have critiqued it at that time, that's well known. I don't know, zeitgeist. I mean, I have always been off the period that I live in. I've never been engaged in the hot topical subjects of the particular moment certainly race and queerness and indigeneity. I mean, this is a very hot subject right now, and this is very much issues around race and sex all have defined the era that I've grown up in, actually. And these are not issues that I have picked up on as topics, and I'm actually not interested in topics. I'm much more interested in a kind of a more metaphysical way of approaching work. So I never feel like I'm quite in the. No. So yes, I'm aware of it and I'm conversant with it, and I'm engaging in it as a viewer. But I'm not. I don't pick those things up myself. I don't try to ride it. I don't try to ride a wave of the moment.
You mentioned that the injection, or maybe you might even call it the surprise encounter with humor in your work, Paulette. Is that, you might say, is humor really a kind of surprise that occurs from time to time, or is humor embedded in your practice? And I suppose we could call it a kind of playfulness of the human condition, or a sense of...
I think for sure playfulness is embedded in it, and a kind of, maybe I could give you, it's complicated. Yes, I can think, when I use my own voice, which I don't always do, but when I author something that, because I work in very different ways, when I'm authoring something, humor, yes, for sure, it's something. I don't try to do it, I just do it. It just can't. It is a default. It's default position, and it's maybe a default position to be with someone and to be playful and humorous. When I was describing that suite of works, that was about the Villa E1027, which is titled "History Appears Twice." The first time is tragedy, and the second time is farce. By nature, that work was not very funny, because we're talking about really, there's a lot of threads and currents that were running through that work, but there was certainly a playfulness, the floppy house and the mirror that wouldn't cooperate with you and wouldn't return your gaze. That's funny. But the house itself was very tragic and sad because it was a ruin. So the ruin is this incredible poignant sight, and the ruin birthed the other things that are like have a sense of tragicomedy. And I think it might be the tragicomedy that I'm always kind of interested in. I think that those two things are married in a way. Yeah, you might as well laugh. And I think the humor comes out of in that sadness. Not always, but to be honest with you, like I don't like slapstick. You know, like, or, well, no, it's not that I don't like good slapstick. But you know what I mean? I don't like goofy humor. It's more the tragedy. Although good humor is good humor. Good humor is funny.
And it's often a tool that we deploy in the classroom.
Yes.
And you teach.
Yes.
And I'm kind of curious what is most enjoyable for you about the experience of teaching?
I love proselytizing. I don't know, I love promoting values that I think are really important. I love engaging with students and turning them on. I love getting under the hood of their ideas and helping to help them learn. You know, I love assisting in their learning and caring about them, you know, and making them care and giving them permission and trying to turn them into better participatory citizens and trying to, you know, bring the idea of citizenry into play. You know, the idea, you know, just it's a value thing, and it's about promote, you know, it's about turning them on. It's a bit like, you know, the priest in the pulpit, you know, really, like, I don't mean it, that sounds so corny and stupid, but like I really love engaging with their ideas, because I don't teach like I don't feel like I teach well, I do have the languages that I'm responsible for, like it could be film, you know, and the techniques involved in filmmaking, video production. But I think of contemporary art and how you approach an idea and how that idea gets manipulated and gets turned into form. And to be talking like that and to elevate the conversation and to introduce them and to persuade them, you know, into a conversation that they feel empowered by. So, you know, it's a gift and a joy to go to work and do something that you love and to talk about things that you love and to think about art and to present art that you love and to give a critique that's you know, I've learned a lot about critiquing from you, and it's just that's another thing. You're with your colleagues and, you know, you're engaging in a way of talking about a student's work where you find the most positive thing that you can say and blow that up so that it becomes something that they feel good about what they're doing. So yeah, it's a joy. On the flip side of that, I feel like I've given too much of myself away recently. And I feel like all of my best energy lately, I've been feeling like all of my best energy has been going into teaching. And I really need to, I need to take a break because I really need to be alone. I need to be with that. I need to stop putting out, and I need to be more, you know, in a different space.
And you need to sit up.
I need to, okay. It's hard on, you know.
No, I understand that.
Yeah, I'll put a pillow behind me. So, yeah, there. Okay, so, I'm not going to continue. I've answered that enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes you 3 inches taller.
Can I talk if you want? So I might say that I think community is really important, hugely important. And I might think that with my students, I'm, it's another community, but I'm also trying to get them to realize that they are not, students can think of themselves as producers of artwork where it's just also important, but I've never really thought about it like that. I've always thought that it's a dialogue, that you're participating in a larger culture. Mm-hmm. And so there's this idea of community too. And one of the great gifts about teaching is that you continue to grow with the young, you have this fantastic opportunity to be engaged with ever advancing new generations of, they challenge you and all of their ideas and their ways of thinking, not all of them, but that it's always, I learned so much. I mean, I just learned so much from teaching, from what my students are doing, from the ways they are thinking, from the ways they engage with technology. They've also kept me fresh on my toes with technology too, because they're always in the front of that. Yeah, it's great, stimulating.
Do you find the same with your relationship with curators?
Oh, the relationship with curators. Well, I haven't had that much of a relationship with curators, to be honest. Like, curation, that's a funny thing. I had curators. I mean, it can be a fantastic experience, and I have had. There's people that I have been very honored to work with. And yes, it can be a really creative experience, but I don't know, they're a bit like God now, the curator. It's a funny thing. Curators. I mean, I have been given opportunities by curators that have been really fantastic. I don't know. I don't know how to talk about curators. I'm teaching a curatorial class. Ask me in a couple of months. I have curated, and that's a gift to go and research and put together. I put together a program of work once that I was so proud of. And it was around this idea of the female subject acting, the female subject and irrationality, and not in that sounds so negative and non-feminist, but it was about alternative solutions to political structures, and it was a very exciting program to curate. And I learned, I just discovered all kinds of fabulous artists. So I think it's quite fun to curate.
What about the critical reception that you've had to the work? Have you been satisfied with that critical response? Or if that's too broad a question, have there been particular critical strategies that you have found most useful when applied to your own practice?
Well, critical strategies that I've found useful. I've enjoyed having an opportunity to be in an interview scenario where I'm having a dialogue with someone and that we're really engaged. It's been a pleasure to have been interviewed by some people who have taken an interest in my work, and that's been an honor. How criticism operates in so many different ways. Like, you've got your newspapers, and that's about publicity, really. And I mean, sometimes we are gifted as a community to have decent critics working at large. Like, I would say Murray White is an interesting contemporary writer or John Bentley Mays when he was writing, and
James Adams? James Adams?
Yes, but to be honest, my focus is really in production, and I might, to a fault, this is my babies, to a fault, to my detriment maybe, have not been, I don't know what, it's criticism. It's not something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I mean, I was reading John Ruskin when I was in Florence, and that's an interesting critic, but critics, yes, I don't know, I can't say anything intelligent about critics. I think they played a more, the idea of print and maybe they played a more definitive role in the previous times. Maybe they don't play such. Maybe it's too complex now for a critic to even grapple with the idea of. Sure, they would have a role, and yes, I'm interested in the writer. Like I might say a writer like I've mentioned, Jan Verwert or David Joslet. There's certain, and yes, they're operating as critics, but it's really idea based, not so much dealing with a particular work or even not my work, but ideas and framing of ideas, and then placing work within a framework of those ideas. So that kind of criticism I'm interested in, yes, and they have a role to play.
You have a long career, Paulette, and maintaining a career can be tricky. And I wonder if it has been tricky, or if it has, whether you expected that when you entered into the role of being an artist, and what your experience of trying to maintain a career as a working professional has been.
You're catching me at a good time, Ian. Asked me a question about how tricky it is, because I feel like I'm coming out of a little bit of a slump, which is good for me. It's good that I can say coming out of, because I'm very excited. I'm all of a sudden on. I feel like I'm on the cusp of coming out of a little, what I feel. I don't know. I don't know if it was a depression, but it was maybe, just not teaching too much, not finding the right balance in my life between teaching responsibilities and my career. And I feel like right at this juncture, right now, I've got a new project that I'm working on that I'm very excited about, and which would even be difficult to talk about, and not necessarily something I want to talk about, but I just feel full of hope, actually. So when I say difficult time, I don't know. I was questioning my faith the last little while, but I stopped questioning it because I don't know, because I don't have to question it anymore. You always want a call and response or a return on your investment, and I suppose you get disappointed that you're not getting the return on your investment. But a part of me, well, of course I care. I mean, there was just a couple of big shows that were curated about the 80s, and I'm off, like I'm not even in them. Like, I mean, that's hugely disappointing, to have been so participatory and so in the center of what was going on, and then to not even reckon in it, in the appraisal of that. You go, okay. So, I've dealt with those things, and I've also dealt with a lot of being overlooked. So a part of me goes, it's not really very much I can do about it. I can't. All you have to do, you just have to keep showing up. And I also believe that because I really care, like I'm constantly renewing my relationships with, young people, and I'm okay. I'm making work. It's really the work that matters in the end. And then you're gone. And I don't think we live in heroic times anymore either. And I think that I think that's a question of the era that I grew up in. So I like to work because it's just really satisfying to make work.
I suppose what you were just talking about leads a little bit to a question that is perhaps rather fraught, because it's so complicated.
You don't mind if these guys... Okay, stop it. Shush. Stop. That's enough.
But I'm interested in your response to the question of the art system and how it operates currently or today.
Yeah.
And there are many aspects.
Okay, that's enough.
There's many
It's
aspects.
just dominance, by the way.
There's many aspects to the art system. And I suppose one just chooses that particular aspect that one has a response to. But nonetheless, I'm going to ask the question whether or to what extent you pay attention to the art system, to what extent you think about it.
Oh, I think about it I think about it. Sure, we all think about it because we're confronted with it all the time. We go to art fairs, you go to biennales, you go to larger, there aren't that many larger centers in Toronto, but let's say we go to New York or London, and I'm pretty aware of it, the power dynamics and how they shift and change, and the art system, the art system, I don't know. It's shifted, we talked earlier about, when I came into it, it was about, I thought it was about ideas and meaning making and a critical engagement. But the art community was much smaller then. And I was also young. And now I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I mean, not the other end, but the, the top end, bottom end. The art system is always looking for the new. And this is maybe what the zeitgeist is, it's always what the new is. And there's been a huge paradigm shift in the last 10 years that I could never fully be a part of because the language and the rules have changed because of digital technologies. It will be a different world. It is a different world. And I'm very hyper aware of that as I teach. I'm hyper aware of Instagram and, Tumblr and post-internet and, and on and on and on and on and on, in a different way of thinking and a different way of being. And I'm even talking to my son about it, and he's a kind of hybrid who grew up with analog and digital, and he's the last of that generation, and now it's only digital, I'm very aware that the art world will always have an avant-garde, right? That will always be there's where the critic and the curator come in, but it's just so vast. It's just so vast. So we can only engage with the moments and the people and the communities that we actually have physical access to. I think that's the only way to look at it. So when I think about the system, which is enormous, I mean, I've played in it. I've been collected. I have galleries, and I have a gallery in London. So but we're not. And then there's the levels of success that people have, and where one fits into that. It's best not to think about it. It's just best not to get too caught up in all that. But of course, we're aware of it.
Mm. Well, it does occur to me that, and perhaps it's implicit in what you're saying, Paulette, that there is a kind of voracious quality to the system. It swallows you up and then spits you out.
Yeah.
How do you see it as having that? And there's almost an amnesia that falls on it. Do you think that the system itself is, useful?
Well, any systems are naturally occurring, right? Don't you think? I mean, it's an organism that self builds itself. So there's really not too much that we can do about it. So I see it as a rather complex organism that I want to continually be aware of. And I don't think that I think one can still play within that and engage with it. All of those things that you're saying is absolutely true, but at the end of the day, you have to make great work, and it has to be relevant for the moment in which it's made, or for some preceding moment, which can always happen. A part of it is luck, and a part of it is just working really hard. So that's the only thing that you can do, and be very aware of all of these things. There's not. Some of it's in your control, and you can be really smart about it. And that maybe when I said, I was in a slump, maybe I wasn't caring about it. But all of a sudden now, I kind of have a bit of an interest in ramping it up, seeing what we, Anyway, this, it's an ongoing thing.
In the last several decades, as we know, the classical notion of the artist as an originator, as somehow providing a sense of authenticity to the culture, has come in for considerable criticism and considerable deconstruction. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of curious, Paulette, what do you think that there's any fragment of originality left to work with, or in fact, has all that deconstruction of originality really achieved anything at all? In fact, is the original, or the notion of originality, still a vital force? Mm-hmm. How would it be defined?
Yeah, that's an interesting way to pose that question, because it pitches it in a certain direction. Originality wouldn't be a word that I would use. I mean, I think it's a word that is great for this conversation, but in relationship to authenticity, I might say that what would make something original would be a way of playing with a series of conditions, or a series of, with an idea that you're placing into, gesture vectors and materiality, and it's the spark and the risk and the release, and it's kind of a risk taking that you can do within that, and an intelligence and an observance of opportunity. And maybe that's where that humor thing comes in, where you go, oh, spark, great. And that, if it is, I may not call that originality, but I would call it, that aha moment. And I think it's more that, and that thing that we do when we see a really great work that touches us, that's always going to happen. We're always going to be touched by great work. We're always going, and it will be an inventiveness. Whether I would call that originality, I mean, that's a way, but I would call it authentic. And I don't think this, you can see people reliant on modes of theoretical discourse where they've constructed their work in these really smart ways. And, that isn't that is not necessarily the work that I'm interested in, nor am I. I don't think we're in this moment anymore where everybody was picking, you're picking up on previous movements and riffing on them. And I don't know. I mean, we are in dialogue with all of the languages and all of the materialities and art and ideas that have gone before us, and they are what we're playing with. I mean, we're still talking, we're still in Aristotelian or, Platonic, we're still all in these metaphysical ways of thinking and being, and political, and I don't know. I'm not concluding that in any kind of grand way, but yeah, I mean, originality, this is when I talk, focus, commitment, spark, opportunity, recognizing when something is right, working it until you get it into the state of being where you can sign off on it. That's what it's all about.